All right, welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory, and this is take two. And that's because I was in the middle of recording and I decided, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take a shower, and, that'll freshen me up. It'll make me feel a little bit more alert and whatnot as I record the episode. So let that be a note if you do any sort of comedy material. Sometimes you might want to freshen up beforehand, and it might make you better at your delivery and stuff like that. So, this is a comedy routine trial run episode, and it's partly because I wanted to inject humor into my podcast a little bit more here and there. It's really not a humor podcast overall, so this is like a new thing that I'm doing. And I've got a comedy event lined up next week. It's actually an open mic, so nothing too fancy. But I want to do a little bit of a trial run, so here's another episode full of that. And the last time I did stand up, I actually had a cold, so it really kind of messed things up a little bit. I was struggling to speak. And in fact, if the event had been held just a few days earlier, I probably wouldn't have shown up at all or showed up at all because I had that uncontrollable snot thing going on. And it really makes me respect some of the greatest orators of all time because you really don't think of them as dealing with that problem. Like, you don't imagine Lincoln showing up at the Gettysburg Address and he's, using his stovepipe hat as a snot catcher or something like that. You don't imagine MLK shooting off snot rockets in between lines of his I Have a Dream speech. You don't even think of somebody like, Malcolm X ever using his sleeve to rub snot on it. That's he's somebody who's all calm and cool, and he seemed like he was very deliberate in his words and his actions. He wasn't somebody who had like a lot of nervous energy. He wasn't all fumbling all over the place like an idiot. That's something I wish I had. I wish I was cool, sort of like Malcolm X. Of course, all three of those figures have something in common, and I'll let you guess what that is. They all had a similar fate, and that's one of those weird coincidences, perhaps. I don't know. But anyway, speaking of, historic figures and facts, the 4th of July is right around the corner, so I'm going to actually do a little bit of patriotic trivia for you involving the Star Spangled Banner, aka the national anthem. So, did you know that Sir Jacob Donserly did not enjoy much financial success despite his famous invention being mentioned in the Star Spangled Banner? Spangled Banner, I should say. Uh, the Donserly light. Well, he died a pauper. Unfortunately, it was a tragic thing. He just didn't have the skills to pay the bills when it comes to promoting his invention, I guess. So he died a penniless man. And here's another fun fact. Did you know that there was actually a rebuttal anthem written by TTocs Sicnarf? And this was, maybe you could call it, the anti-national anthem or the anti-anthem. And it was simply titled, Sir, May Your Flag Wind Up in Tatters. And it has sort of a weird opening. It goes like, Oh, mute, cannot I be blind, away from the night's late darkness? It was very cryptic and strange, and he also died penniless, so that might be a little bit more appropriate for him to die penniless, because we don't like people who write anti anthems when it comes to the all time greatest patriotic song ever for the United States. We spit on those types of people, right? And he maybe had a deserved fate. Anyway, when it comes to very popular figures, I think one of the biggest popular figures in American hip hop who is sort of like a hip hop cultural ambassador, well, that would be Snoop Dogg, right? And he used to be known as Snoop Doggy Dogg, which is kind of a name that I prefer. But Snoop Dogg is one of those people who also he's got a smooth way of talking. He just seems kind of like a cool guy. Imagine him smoking pot, and he used to be known for rapping, but now he's just more of a mascot, I guess. Uh, Slap his face and his name on a product, and you'll probably sell millions of whatever you're trying to sell. And that wouldn't be the same though. You don't think of him the same if you just change one little tiny aspect of his name. So, for example, if you were to call him Snop Dog, if you just change one letter, remove one letter from his name, well, he's no longer so cool, is he? Right? Like, Snop Dog, well, that's somebody who eats hot dogs off the floor. Snop Dog, that's somebody who got in a fight with his uncle over who gets to use the toaster first, and you also just know that Snop Dog smells like shit. That's the funny thing about it, right? And when it comes to the interesting aspects of Snop Dog, here's another one. I think he's actually a white dude. Like, for some reason, I don't think of him as a black dude. Like, he's a white dude. He's got reddish brown hair, and he has a slack jawed appearance, all that kind of stuff. So Snop Dogg is definitely vastly different from Snoop Dogg. And uh, you know, I gotta kind of pick on Snoop Dogg himself a little bit here too, because you know, not that long ago he actually had a bit of a controversy because he was on some stupid podcast, and he for some reason said that he attended a Disney movie with his grandkids or something, and he was like, I don't know how to explain this character who has two female parents. Like, how do I explain that to my kids? Well, Snoop, you dummy, that is called adoptive parenting. You don't even need to talk about sex at all in order to explain that to your kids, or your grandkids or whatever. And he did actually redeem himself after that little slip up or whatever you want to call it, because he actually did some benefit for gay rights organizations after that. But nevertheless, it kind of forever changes how I see Snoop Dogg. And another thing about it that's kind of annoying is that Snoop Dogg is somebody who actually shot some porno movies back in the day for Hustler. They were called Doggy Style, and you betcha they had some girl on girl action in them. So I guess lesbian sex isn't so awkward to explain so long as you're making money off of it and filming it for lonely perverts to whack off to, I guess. So I wonder how Snoop would explain that one to his grandchildren. I guess maybe he wouldn't. But maybe they would show up with the old DVD in their hand and say, "Hey, Grandpa, did you film this? I thought you said that lesbian sex was confusing, yet here you are exploiting it for profit." Well, hopefully they never had that little event happen in their household or whatever. I imagine Snoop Dogg lives in a big mansion, and he probably, feels responsible enough to not expose his grandkids to that type of material. But nevertheless, like, what's up with that, Snoop? Like, come on, you should have been smarter than that. And I'm not that much of a homophobe myself. I'm a heterosexual dude, and I try to be totally open minded when it comes to a lot of stuff. I'm not quick to like judge homosexuality or lesbians or whatever. In fact, I kind of like lesbians in the same way that Snoop Dogg did. But when it comes down to it, I think there is one scenario where I definitely would actually go gay myself, even if I was more of a homophobe. And let let me explain this, and I think you'll understand. You might be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I agree. I would feel the same way. But if it's like late at night and you get a knock on the door, and what do you know? It's both Brad Pitt and Johnny Depp, and they're like, hey, would you be interested in having some gay sex with us? I don't think I could say no to that shit, to be honest. Like, I think I'd have to sign up for that one, because it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity. You just don't turn that down. And I think there's possibly even a law in the books about this. Let me check my notes. Like, oh yes, it's called the Honoring Hollywood Hunks Unsolicited Nighttime Knockings Act, also known as the Hunk Act. And it even says that it's not even gay. Like, there's a very cool clause that reminds you that some things transcend normal sexual concerns and questions. This is like a special opportunity, a once in a lifetime shot, and it even looks good on a resume. Like, you go to a job interview, and they'll say, looking at your resume, hey, it says here that you actually had sex with both Brad Pitt and Johnny Depp. And you'll be like, yep, indeed. And you'll say, well, that shows some strong leadership and a commitment to the task at hand. And you'll say, you bet I was committed to it. And he'll ask, or she'll ask, or whoever is giving the interview will be like, well, did you satisfy them both? And you'll be saying, yes, I did. Even though they did much of the work themselves, I did. I did accept them, and I accepted the responsibility, and I did my best to please them. And when we finished, they thanked me, and it was something for the record books. It's something I'm going to be uh, remembering for the rest of my days. And you know what? You'll probably get the job. So yes, it's one of those things that just transcends conventional sexuality. It's something you just say yes to. It's like an amazing thing that just makes your day and your entire life a different thing altogether.